Donald Trump is back in the White House, and state officials in Illinois are bracing for what might happen next. It's Friday, January 24th. I'm Peter Hancock, and this is Capitol Cast. Donald J. Trump was sworn in this week for a second term as president, and almost immediately it seemed as though many in Illinois went into a state of alert. Much of that was due to Trump's campaign rhetoric, in which he promised that if elected, he would launch the biggest mass deportation operation in U.S. history, starting on day one. Well, on day one, Trump did, in fact, issue dozens of executive orders and policy directives. He reinstated the Remain in Mexico policy for people seeking asylum in the United States. He paused refugee admissions, and he rescinded a Biden administration policy that had limited enforcement actions in so-called sensitive areas, such as schools, playgrounds, child care centers, and churches. The Illinois State Board of Education then issued what it called non-regulatory guidance to advise local school officials on what they should do if or when federal immigration officers show up on school grounds. Elsewhere in Illinois, there just seemed to be a lot of anxiety, as Governor J.B. Pritzker explained when he was asked about it at a Thursday news conference and was accused of overreacting.
What are you talking about? They are literally threatening people all across the country. How can you say that we're overreacting somehow? We're not. They're the ones, I'm talking about Donald Trump and his administration, Tom Homan, people at the Department of Homeland Security. They're the ones that are threatening people, again, who are law-abiding, who are often the anchors of their communities, who are paying taxes in this country. They're the ones who are threatening people. We're just standing up for people who live in our state and in our city.
And here to talk about some of the reaction in Illinois is Ashley Soriano. She's a reporting fellow from Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism and is working with Capital News Illinois this year. You covered some of the Inauguration Day protests in Chicago and some of the other reaction in that area. Talk to us a little bit about the protest that you attended. What was that like? What were people saying at that time?
Hey there, Peter. Thank you for having me. So I attended the Inauguration Day protest this past Monday, and there were hundreds of people marching, supporters, advocates, and more than 80 different community organizations rallying behind, diversity, multicultural exchange, and different ethnicities. As we know, the new administration is really big right now on seeking to conduct mass deportations. And so a lot of these organizations came together to really emphasize that this population who may be directly affected knows their rights ahead of these proposed ICE immigration raids.
Okay, and as we sit here on Friday afternoon, the 24th, there haven't really been any immigration raids yet, at least in the Chicago area. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So those raids were expected Tuesday, the day after inauguration. And from our on-the-ground reporting with one of my colleagues, Ismail, we, went out to some neighborhoods and observed that Little Village neighborhood on Tuesday was pretty silent, little foot traffic. It was sub-zero temperatures that day. And to our knowledge, and after reaching out to ICE as well, those raids did not seem to happen. But the immigrant community across Illinois and in Chicago and the suburb areas they're on edge. They have told us they're on edge.
Okay, and so what are they being advised? I know that the ACLU and other immigrant rights organizations, advocacy groups have weighed in on this. What kind of advice are they receiving, and how much actual peril are they in right now?
Yeah, so one organization that I spoke with, the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, they said that they are hosting workshops, role play workshops, teaching people what to do if a loved one is arrested or detained by ICE, and what to do if you yourself are directly approached by an immigration officer. And so they're teaching them, quote unquote, know your rights, and those include stay silent. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to a lawyer, and pretty much, in the heat of the moment, of course, it can be emotional, but they really encourage their clients who do not have legal status to follow that 3-step process, essentially.
And so the mood right now, I mean, President Trump has been in office for a few days. We haven't seen, the massive sorts of police actions that a lot of people imagined. Does it seem like maybe the mood is calming down a little bit, or are people staying alert and staying on their toes?
From our reporting, people are staying on their toes, and these community organizations have said they have enacted these, protocols and sessions that they're teaching for months now, even before Trump had, entered office. And we know that, in other states, actually, in Texas today, it was announced that there were about 80 arrests in South Texas. The Texas representative, Tony Gonzalez, for that area, which borders Mexico, announced that. And so according to that report, there are arrests happening. We know Trump is very big on conducting this mass deportation. And so the community in Illinois as a whole, they definitely, are saying that they're concerned.
Okay, well, Ashley, we want to thank you for being there and thank you for being part of the fellowship program, and hope that you stay on top of this story, and look forward to hearing more from you as the semester goes on.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it, and good to talk to you.
And in other news, the inauguration of President Trump was not the only thing going on in Illinois. We also have the ongoing federal corruption trial of former longtime Illinois House Speaker Michael J. Madigan. Our reporter covering that trial, Hannah Meisel, is in the courtroom again today, but Jerry Nowicki has been editing that coverage as it's been going on. Jerry, what can you tell us about where the trial is? Are we about to wrap up this thing that's been going on for months?
Yeah, we're at least nearing that point. The government has been doing closing arguments. They've had, I believe, an 800-slide PowerPoint presentation, and they tag teamed the prosecutors that were making the arguments, just trying to say that they're trying to pick apart former Speaker Madigan's testimony. It was a surprise that he took the stand, and he essentially said, "Oh yeah, I didn't realize people weren't working for the contracts they got. If I recommended someone for a job, I always expected they would work." So there have been over 60 witnesses and I think 150 recordings or so. And they're trying to use some of Madigan's own words with phone calls that were wiretapped with the co-defendant, Mike McLean, just to kind of show that they allege Madigan knew about the no-work contracts, and he is guilty of the 23 counts, including bribery and racketeering and operating a criminal enterprise, essentially.
Okay, so the nature of this case, or the core legal theory behind it, is that for years and years while Michael Madigan was Speaker, people in his inner circle were given sort of no-show jobs, no-work jobs at companies like AT&T and Commonwealth Edison in exchange for Madigan pushing through legislation that was favorable to these companies. And one of the things that I think was surprising to a lot of people was that Michael Madigan was always extremely careful. He famously did not carry a cell phone. He did not use email. He did not text people. He stayed away from all kinds of modern electronic communications. And yet, throughout this trial, we have heard what seems like hours and hours of secretly recorded conversations, wiretapped telephone calls, recordings of conversations he had in restaurants. How damaging do we think all of this evidence was that was gathered against him?
Yeah, well, one thing I'll say there is the contracts were sort of indirectly through ComEd and AT&T. They were through uh, clients who had subcontracts, so it was sort of a couple layers of separation there. But I think, as Hannah has reported very thoroughly, this is a challenging case. There are so many layers to it, and it could be hard for. It's certainly a big ask for prosecutors to try to prove something as vast as these conspiracy charges, but it's also there's a lot of recordings here. Madigan, took a risk in taking the stand, and we're just going to have to see how the jury reacts to what they've heard.
What was the crux of his testimony when he took the stand in his own defense?
Yeah, he stated his regret for ever speaking to Danny Solis, who was the Chicago alderman who was wearing the wire that a conversation between he and Madigan sort of made Madigan the target of this investigation that was already ongoing. When and Madigan's saying, he's trying to say that he didn't know any of these contractors were receiving these contracts for no work, and anyone he recommended he expected to work. But I think one of the challenges that came up is that the judge actually allowed more evidence of Madigan discussing contracts with at ComEd, that not contracts that were alleged to be part of bribery, but just he knew about some of these contracts that were happening, and that was a piece of evidence that prosecutors are now going to try to use to show that Madigan had some level of knowledge that he claims he didn't have when he was on the stand.
And so we expect this case to go to the jury possibly in the upcoming week. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's possibly next week. They're going full day of court today, and just sort of marching onward next week.
Okay, and also next week we should note that the Illinois General Assembly comes back into session, and so the Capital News Illinois team will be covering that, as well as the Michael Madigan trial and any additional fallout we might see from the new Trump administration. Until then, that's all the time we have for this edition of Capital Cast. Capital Cast is a production of Capital News Illinois, a public affairs reporting project of the Illinois Press Foundation with significant funding from the Robert R. McCormick Foundation. For now, this is Peter Hancock on behalf of the entire Capital News Illinois team saying thank you for listening.